November 23rd. 2022 guards found Markus Delaney face down on the shower floor, bleeding. His jaw was broken in 2 places, and his left eyebrow was split wide open. The warden of Angola prison, Wade Crawford, walked down to the infirmary that same cold night. He leaned close to Markus and whispered 5 words that would haunt every sleepless night after. "Next time, they will not find you." That was not a threat from some random convict or gang leader running. That came from the man who ran the largest maximum security prison in the United States. But here is the part that will make your blood freeze solid inside your veins tonight. The man who whispered those words was the same man who committed the murder Markus was serving for. This is the story of a man who spent 16 years staring into the face of his. And the real killer wore no prison jumpsuit, but instead a warden uniform with polished brass buttons. Before we go deeper into this darkness, I need you to do something important for me. Drop a comment below and tell me, would you survive 16 years knowing the truth nobody believes? Hit subscribe because this story will unfold in ways that will challenge everything you believe. And share this with someone who still thinks the justice system never fails innocent people. To understand how Markus Delaney ended up in that blood-stained shower, we need to go back. Back to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 2006, when Markus was just 28 years old. He was a mechanic with grease permanently embedded in the deep lines of his wide, strong hands. He worked 6 days a week at a shop on Plank Road, fixing engines that nobody else could. His mother, Dolores, would pack him lunch every morning before her nursing shift at the hospital. Markus had never been arrested, never been in a fight, never even gotten a speeding ticket before. He was the kind of man who fixed neighbors' cars for free on Sunday afternoons after church. But none of that mattered, because in West Feliciana Parish, Louisiana, being innocent means absolutely nothing. What matters is whether you fit the description, and Markus fit it perfectly for them. On the night of September 14th, 2006, a young white woman named Caitlin Barrow died. She was found in a ditch off Highway 61 with bruises around her throat and broken. The parish was small, and the pressure to find a killer was enormous and immediate. Deputy Sheriff Wade Crawford, 22 years old, ambitious and desperate, led the investigation from day one. He told the sheriff he had a witness who saw a black man near the scene. That witness was a methamphetamine addict named Dale Pruitt, who would say anything for reduced charges on him. Crawford personally conducted the interrogation of Markus Delaney for 14 hours without a single break. No lawyer present, no recording made, just Crawford and Markus in a room with concrete walls. By hour 12, Markus could barely keep his eyes open, but he never confessed, not one single time. They did not need a confession because Crawford had something better than words from Markus. He had a crime lab report signed by a technician named Gerald Fontaine stating fiber evidence matched. Fontaine was later fired for falsifying evidence in 14 other cases across 3 different Louisiana parishes. But by the time that happened, Markus had already been convicted and sentenced to life without parole. The public defender assigned to his case was handling 312 other cases that same year. She met Markus twice before trial, and both meetings lasted less than 20 minutes combined together. The jury was 11 white and 1 black, and they deliberated for less than 4 hours total. Markus stood in that courtroom wearing shackles and heard the word "guilty" echo off the wood panels. His mother, Dolores, collapsed in the second row, and 2 bailiffs had to carry her out the door. But here is what nobody in that courtroom knew, and what would stay buried for 16 long years. The real killer was standing 10 feet from Markus at the entire trial wearing a deputy sheriff uniform. Wade Crawford had followed Caitlin Barrow home from a bar that night after she rejected his advances. He caught her on the shoulder of Highway 61 and tried to force himself on her body. When she fought back, scratching his face and neck, he panicked and squeezed until she stopped moving. He sat in his patrol car for 40 minutes afterward, staring at his hands, trying to stop shaking. Then he called it in as a discovered body and began constructing the frame that would bury Markus. Crawford knew that a young black mechanic with no alibi would be the perfect vessel for his sin. The skin cells under Caitlin's fingernails were collected, but Crawford made sure they were never tested ever. 16 years. 16 years, Markus woke up at 5:45 to the electric lock buzzing his cell open. 16 years he counted the cracks in the ceiling above his bunk and reached 237. Angola sits on 18,000 acres of former plantation land where slaves once picked cotton under whips. Now inmates work those same fields for 4 cents an hour while mounted guards watch from horseback above. Markus worked in the prison library shelving books and teaching himself law from dusty case volumes. He filed 11 appeals, and every single one came back, denied, stamped, and sealed with bureaucratic indifference. He wrote letters to organizations, to journalists, to anyone who might listen to an inmate's desperate words. Most letters were never answered, and the few responses he got were polite versions of "go away." But Markus kept a journal, and by 2022 he had written 5,800 entries. Then in October 2022, a 29-year-old law student named Nikki Chen changed everything. She was a Tulane law graduate working as an intern at the New Orleans Innocence Project downtown. Her parents were Taiwanese immigrants who ran a dry cleaning shop and never understood her career choice. Nikki was reviewing archived case files from West Feliciana Parish when one detail stopped her cold. The forensic report in Markus Delaney's case was signed by Gerald Fontaine, the disgraced falsifying lab technician. She pulled the thread, and the entire fabric of the conviction began to unravel before her eyes. She drove 3 hours to Angola on a Tuesday morning to meet the man the system had swallowed whole. Markus sat behind the glass, looked at this small woman with ink-stained fingers, and said absolutely nothing. He had heard promises before from 11 different lawyers, and every promise had turned to ash and dust. Nikki came back the next Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, sitting behind glass, waiting for words. Markus watched her through the smudged partition, noticing how she chewed pen caps until they cracked apart. On her 4th visit, she pressed a single sheet of paper against the glass, facing toward him. It contained 14 case numbers where Gerald Fontaine had fabricated evidence and destroyed innocent people's entire lives forever. Markus read each number slowly, and his hands began trembling for the first time in 11 years. He did not speak, but he placed his palm flat against the glass right across from hers. Then that was not forgiveness, and it was not trust, but it was a crack in the wall he built. Nikki drove home that night, doing 90 on Interstate 10, with tears blurring the highway lane markers. She did not know that Crawford had already seen her name 4 times in the visitor logbook. Crawford sat in his oak-paneled office that Wednesday morning, scrolling through the visitor database on screen. He typed Nikki Chen into the search bar, and within 3 minutes knew her employer, her school, her address. Most wardens would not care about a law student visiting one inmate among 6,000 confined men here. But Crawford was not most wardens, because most wardens had not strangled a woman on Highway 61. He picked up his desk phone and called Lieutenant Beauchamp down in Block C with specific, clear instructions. By Friday morning, a disciplinary report appeared in Markus Delaney's file, citing contraband possession during routine search. The contraband was a sharpened toothbrush handle that Markus had never seen before in his entire life. Markus was transferred to the restricted housing unit, where attorney visits required 72-hour advance written approval. The door to his new cell closed with a sound like a coffin lid dropping shut on hope. But Crawford made a mistake that powerful men always make when they believe nobody is watching them. He assumed Nikki Chen was alone and that silencing Markus would be enough to kill the investigation. What he did not know was that Nikki had already copied every document and mailed duplicates to 3 locations. She sent packages to her supervising attorney to a federal courthouse and to her own parents' dry cleaning shop. Meanwhile, inside the restricted unit, Markus discovered something Crawford never anticipated would happen at all. His neighbor in the next cell was Reuben Carter, who had survived 34 years inside these walls. Reuben communicated through the ventilation grate using a whisper system perfected over 3 long, brutal decades here. He told Markus that Crawford had personally visited the restricted unit twice this week, asking guards about him. Markus pressed his face against the cold metal grate and whispered back, "I know who he really is." Reuben did not ask what Markus meant, because men who survive Angola learn to trust without demanding explanations. And instead, he offered something more valuable than belief, and that was a network built over decades inside. Reuben knew every guard who drank too much and every nurse who looked the other way at night. He knew which inmates carried messages and which ones sold information straight to the administration office. Within 48 hours, Reuben had passed word to a kitchen worker who passed it to a trustee. That trustee walked mail to the external post office every Thursday morning carrying letters in canvas bags. Hidden inside a legal correspondence envelope was a note from Markus containing details only the real killer knew. It described the scratch marks on Crawford's neck, the 40 minutes he sat in his patrol car, shaking. That information reached Nikki Chen's desk on a Monday morning, and her coffee went cold, untouched beside it. Nikki now had something dangerous enough to get people killed if she moved too fast or carelessly. She needed corroboration because a prisoner's smuggled note would never survive a motion to dismiss in court. So she started digging into Crawford's past with the focus of someone defusing a bomb wire by wire. She pulled his personnel file from West Feliciana Parish and found he was assigned patrol duty that September night. She checked the evidence log and discovered the DNA sample from under Caitlin's fingernails was marked untested. 16 years sitting in a refrigerated archive, while an innocent man rotted in a cell just miles away. The sample existed and it was viable, but accessing it required a court order from a parish judge. Every judge in West Feliciana Parish had attended Crawford's annual charity crawfish boil at least 3 times over. Nikki stared at her office wall covered in pinned documents and red string and whispered, "I'll hear." 3 weeks into her investigation, Nikki found Shane Beauchamp drinking alone at a bar called Catfish Corner. It sat 20 miles south of Angola on a road lined with sugarcane fields and broken yellow center lines. Beauchamp was 35 years old, with bloodshot eyes and fingernails bitten down to raw pink skin underneath. He was 3 bourbons deep when Nikki sat on the stool next to him and ordered a ginger ale. She did not introduce herself as a lawyer because lawyers make guilty men run and scared men disappear. Instead, she talked about the weather and the saints and how the mosquitoes were especially terrible this late season. By the 4th bourbon, Beauchamp mentioned that working nights at Angola made a man see things he cannot forget. Nikki asked what kind of things, and Beauchamp's hand froze with the glass halfway to his trembling lips. He said sometimes the warden walks the blocks at 2 in the morning and visits 1 cell and 1 cell only. That 1 cell belonged to Markus Delaney, and what Crawford did during those visits would surface later in testimony. But right now, in this moment, Nikki had a witness who was crumbling under the weight of his silence. She left Catfish Corner without pushing further because a scared witness pushed too hard becomes no witness at all. She drove back to New Orleans with her recorder running, capturing her own voice, organizing every single known fact. Crawford killed Caitlin Barrow, then framed Markus, then built his career on the conviction that made him famous. He rose from deputy to sergeant to captain to warden of the very prison, holding his only living evidence. And now that evidence was locked in a restricted unit where Crawford controlled the food, water, air, and light. Nikki gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened and said out loud, "He is going to kill him." The question was no longer whether Crawford would try, but whether she could move fast enough to stop it. She was right, and the clock had already started ticking down toward zero in ways she could not see. Because while Nikki was connecting dots in her cramped office, Crawford was erasing them inside Angola walls. He called a meeting with 4 senior guards and closed his office door and turned off the security cameras. What happened in that room would only surface months later, but the orders were simple and absolutely clear today. Markus Delaney was to be transferred to administrative segregation indefinitely under a fabricated psychological evaluation report filed quietly. The psychiatrist who signed it had never spoken to Markus and never even stepped inside the restricted unit. Crawford also initiated paperwork for an emergency interstate transfer citing unspecified security threats to the inmate population overall. If that transfer went through, Markus would vanish into a federal holding facility where Nikki could never reach him. But Crawford needed 72 hours to process the paperwork, and those 72 hours would cost him everything. Inside the restricted unit, Markus pressed his ear to the ventilation grate and heard Ruben coughing blood again. The older man's diabetes had destroyed his remaining kidney function, and the prison infirmary offered him only aspirin daily. Ruben whispered through the metal slats that he overheard 2 guards discussing a transport van scheduled for Thursday morning. Markus felt the concrete walls tighten around his chest, like the building itself was slowly swallowing him whole alive. He had survived 16 years by becoming invisible, but invisibility cannot protect you from a man who controls everything. For the first time since his conviction, Markus felt something worse than despair, and that was the terror of hope. He had let Nikki through his wall, and now that wall could not protect him from what came next. Ruben said through the grate, "Listen to me, boy. I did not survive 34 years to watch you die here." Then he told Markus about a guard named Darnell Williams, who worked the infirmary and owed Ruben his life. Darnell Williams had been a rookie guard in 2005 when 3 inmates cornered him near the kitchen loading dock. Ruben stepped between them and took a sharpened cafeteria tray handle across his left forearm, saving Darnell completely. That debt had never been repaid, and Ruben had never asked because debts are currency you spend only once. Now Ruben spent it, and Darnell agreed to carry 1 sealed envelope past the security checkpoint Wednesday at dawn. The envelope contained Markus's handwritten affidavit describing every late-night visit Crawford made to his cell in darkness. It described Crawford's whiskey breath, his specific threats, and the exact words he used about Caitlin Barrow that night. Only the killer would know that Caitlin wore a silver bracelet with a hummingbird charm on her left wrist. Crawford had mentioned that bracelet during one of his 2 a.m. visits, taunting Markus with details only murderers carry. That envelope reached Nikki's mailbox 14 hours before the transport van was scheduled to arrive at Angola. Nikki read the affidavit in her kitchen at 11 p.m., with her hands shaking so hard the paper rattled audibly. The hummingbird bracelet detail was never mentioned in any police report or trial transcript or media coverage anywhere. She checked 3 times, cross-referencing every public document, and the bracelet appeared in exactly one place only. The original coroner's inventory listed 1 silver charm bracelet recovered from the victim's left wrist, cataloged and stored. Crawford knew about that bracelet because he watched it catch moonlight while his hands were around Caitlin's throat. Nikki called her supervising attorney David Rousseau at midnight, and he answered on the 7th ring, sounding exhausted. She said 3 sentences and heard him go completely silent for what felt like an entire frozen minute. Then Rousseau said, "File the federal habeas petition first thing tomorrow morning and bypass every parish court entirely now." He also said call Margaret Landry at the Times-Picayune, because if Crawford kills Markus, the world needs to know. The Thursday morning arrived gray and humid with fog rolling off the Mississippi River and swallowing Angola's perimeter fences whole. The transport van sat idling near the administration building, its diesel engine rumbling like a sleeping predator waiting patiently. Two federal marshals leaned against the hood drinking coffee, unaware they were participating in the final act of a cover-up. Inside the restricted unit, guards ordered Markus to strip for a transfer search, and he complied without speaking one word. His journal with 5,847 entries sat on his bunk, and they told him leave it behind. Markus looked at 16 years of his life stacked in composition notebooks and felt something inside his chest crack. He dressed in orange transport coveralls, and they shackled his wrists to a belly chain that clinked with each step. The hallway to the loading dock was 200 yards long, and every step echoed off concrete walls like a countdown. But somewhere between his cell and that van, a phone was ringing in a federal judge's chamber in Baton Rouge. Judge Adrienne Thibodeau had received Nikki's emergency habeas petition at 8:17 a.m., along with 40 pages of evidence. She also received a call from David Rousseau and a separate call from a Times-Picayune journalist asking very specific questions. Thibodeau was not from West Feliciana Parish, and she did not play golf, and she did not attend crawfish boils. She read the petition twice, and then she picked up her phone and called the United States Marshal Service directly. At 9:41 a.m., exactly 19 minutes before the transport van was scheduled to depart, a federal order arrived. The order commanded Angola to halt all transfers of inmate Markus Delaney, pending immediate judicial review of his case. A guard ran the printed order across the yard, while Markus stood in shackles 6 feet from the open van door. Crawford watched from his office window as the guard handed the paper to the transport supervisor, who read it twice. The supervisor looked up toward the warden's window, and Crawford stepped back into the shadows, but not fast enough. Within 48 hours, the DNA sample from under Caitlin Barrow's fingernails was transported to an independent federal laboratory. The results came back in 11 days and matched Wade Crawford's genetic profile with a probability of 1 in 4 billion. The federal agents arrested Crawford on a Tuesday morning in his oak-paneled office while he was drinking his usual black coffee. They used his own handcuffs, and his own guards watched, and not one of them looked away from his face. Markus heard the news from Darnell Williams, who walked to the restricted unit and said 2 words, "It's over." Markus sat on his bunk and stared at the 237 cracks in his ceiling one final time. Reuben's voice came through the ventilation grate, weak and broken, saying, "I told you, boy, I told you so." Somewhere in Baton Rouge, Dolores Delaney answered her phone and dropped it, and her neighbor found her on the kitchen floor. She was not hurt, and she was not unconscious. She was just lying there, laughing and crying at the exact same time.